Hi, and welcome to the I Teach Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 138. What can Andy Dufresne teach us about responsible disclosure? So in 1947, Andy Dufresne arrives in Shawshank State Prison. He is there to serve 2 life sentences back-to-back for murdering his wife and her lover. Supposedly, in a jealous rage, he found the 2 in bed and shot them both with a revolver that he then threw into the river, which police later then found. Andy Dufresne, through the entire court proceeding, has pled his innocence, said he is not guilty of committing murder. Did he think about killing them? Yes, but he did not murder them at all. He's innocent, which is what all criminals say, right? Anyway, as Andy is serving his time in Shawshank, he is given a lot of opportunity to provide services to the prison. This being in 1947, it is, or the 1940s, 1950s, it is legal for prisoners to be used for work purposes, for community service projects, so on and so forth. But as Andy becomes trusted in the prison and starts doing more, he begins doing taxes for the guards after convincing one of the guards that he can basically shelter his winnings for a sweepstakes that he had by gifting his wife the winnings. He then is allowed to do the taxes for all of the guards and eventually do the taxes and money laundering scheme for the warden. Well, throughout the entire process of him doing this and him proceeding to improve the prison by adding a library and getting funds from the Senate to help expand the library in the prison and helping prisoners get their high school equivalency certifications, Andy Dufresne learns through another prisoner that there might be the possibility of somebody else having murdered his wife and her lover through another prisoner named Tommy. Tommy says that he had been put in the same cell as this one guy who just loved to brag about all the crimes that he committed. And one of them specifically described exactly what happened with Andy's case, with the murder of his wife and her side piece. Anyway, the whole thing ends up being a situation where Andy feels like he has a chance to get free. He has a chance to prove his innocence if only he can have police investigate this other prisoner that is at this other prison, and maybe, just maybe, Andy can get his sentence commuted or get out. And so he talks to the warden. He's like, "Hey, warden, I think this is a really good chance. I'd love to see this." And then what happens is, because he discloses this information to the warden says no. And then Andy, being Andy, thinks, well, maybe it's because he thinks that I'm going to report on the money laundering. And so Andy's like, "Well, I would keep it a secret, sir. I would keep the money a secret if that's what you're thinking." And the warden views this as a threat and proceeds to essentially put Andy in isolation and refuses to allow him to see any sort of comfort that he had before, any sort of benefit that he had before, which eventually leads Andy down the path of, instead of trying to improve the prison, eventually escape Shawshank. Which, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the fucking movie, you're missing out. Honestly, it is known as the best fucking movie ever made, ever, which is pretty good. I'd call that fair. It's a 10 out of 10. Absolutely. Weird that it was originally written by Stephen King. But that all being said, responsible disclosure and security release or coordinated vulnerability disclosure is a concept of basically, when a security researcher identifies a vulnerability within a product, that security researcher has a responsibility to disclose it to the company first so that the company may have time to remediate that vulnerability. This works out very well in a lot of ways because one, the vulnerability doesn't become public, and so the bad guys aren't looking for how to exploit that vulnerability first before it can get patched, and it gives the vendor, the developer, whoever made the particular product, it allows them time to craft a response, craft guidelines for their customers, and basically keep everybody safe or as safe as possible. Now, responsible disclosure works because there's a lot of trust involved between the two. A lot of companies have bug bounty programs where they actually pay for this information. Microsoft has some pretty decent ones. There's some that are 128,000 for a single bug. And so, it can be very valuable to these companies for you to disclose these vulnerabilities, and so that they can then begin the work on patching them. And it's great because it works out to help everybody and keep everybody more secure and expedite the process of development, because Microsoft doesn't necessarily have all the resources. Nobody has all the resources to know everything all at once. And so to have an army basically crowdsource some security stuff definitely helps. Now, this means that in the end, there has to be a level of trust between both the reporting party and the reporter party. So when a security researcher reports a finding to a company, there has to be a certain level of trust. And what we have seen in the past is an issue like where Andy Dufresne basically reports that there might be a possibility of him being free, of him being found innocent of the crimes he's been charged with. We see instances where security researchers have been sued or jailed, or even worse, because they attempted to responsibly disclose an issue. So, I'm not going to go through a full list. There are dozens of examples of this over the last 10 or 20 years, where security researchers have been basically found guilty or been charged or basically been sued for crimes because they were attempting to do responsible disclosure. In one example, the state of Missouri sued the St. Louis Dispatch, and specifically one of their reporters, because the state of Mississippi had a flaw in their website that allowed a person to basically go through and find the personal information of any state resident in Missouri. And the way that you could do this was super simple. All you had to do was press F12 on your keyboard from your browser, which is developer mode on your browser. This isn't hacking. This isn't any semblance of hacking. This isn't even responsible disclosure. All this is doing is looking at the data that you are sending me, or that the website has available on it. There is nothing about this that is hacking. And so when this security researcher did this, the state of Missouri basically is claiming that the security researcher was actively hacking their systems, which it wasn't. This was literally just looking at the data that the state of Missouri had sent to the person. Yet the state of Missouri attempted to sue the St. Louis Dispatch, and specifically this one reporter, for this information. And that is a prime example of how not knowing anything about technology harms everybody. If you are a lawyer and you're working on computer crimes and you don't know anything about technology, you might advise your client to pursue this case. But if you know anything about technology and know how things work, you would probably advise this is not hacking. This isn't anything resembling hacking. And that's kind of the purpose of this whole episode. And hopefully podcast at large is to help kind of educate everybody on proper definitions, terms, and how things are actually performed in the world of technology and cybersecurity, so that we don't have situations like this where, again, there is a dude in for the city of Ohio. City of Ohio got compromised, and they got compromised by the Reseda ransomware group. And basically, what happened is the city of Ohio, of Columbus, Ohio, reported that their information got hacked to their users or to their citizens. And when asked what information was compromised, they didn't answer. They ignored them and just said, you need to sign up for Experian, which requires you to put more information online, which is something that people don't want to do. And also, as a side note, fucking identity monitoring like that is completely fucking useless because it doesn't really do a whole lot. The active part of what you should be doing with that information is freezing your credit so that only you can use your credit or other things. Anyway, whole point being is that the city of Columbus, Ohio got hacked by the Reseda ransomware group, and in an effort to identify what information was exposed, because that is important, Connor Goodwolf, who is a security researcher, decided to find the database from the Reseda ransomware group and identify the information themselves. He did not purchase the information from the Reseda ransomware group. He did not download it. He looked at what was publicly available on Tor to identify what information was gathered by the Reseda ransomware group, so that the citizens of the city of Columbus would know what of their information was compromised. And because he did this, the city of Columbus, Ohio, has decided to sue him directly for the attack, seeking damages in excess of $25,000, which is ridiculous. Now, again, this one isn't necessarily responsible disclosure, because Connor went through and he didn't ask permission to do this. He didn't ask if he could do this, and he probably didn't report to the city of Columbus first. He probably reported it to news agencies so that it got out to the citizens first, because he couldn't trust that the city of Columbus, Ohio, would report it appropriately. But again, there's no evidence of wrongdoing here. There's no evidence that Connor was misusing data, or performed an unauthorized action against the computer network. There is no evidence here. He went to what was publicly available on the internet and accessed it directly. That does not mean he was hacking. That means he was browsing the internet. Much like if he went to Reddit and looked at a video on YouTube, that doesn't mean you stole the video from YouTube. That just means you went to Reddit. That's all it does. Anyway, other examples are things like where a group of security researcher students, notified the company FreeHour that there was a vulnerability in their software, basically allowing for an attacker to gain access to the data within. And these students reported it to FreeHour and reported it using their responsible disclosure system that FreeHour had, which was for FreeHour, they requested a 90-day disclosure window, which is something that you can do with responsible disclosure. As long as you have some method of doing that, you can definitely request a period of time for responsible disclosure to exist. And when they reported it to FreeHour, one of the students asked, "Hey, do you guys have a bug bounty program? Because if you do, we'd love to get paid for this." And instead of responding to this, one of the guys at FreeHour basically reported that these guys as hacking, which resulted in these guys getting detained by police, stripped of all of their belongings, stripped of their clothes, and held in detention for hours, which is a really scummy thing to have done. Instead of saying no or being simply we'd love to discuss something in the future. These guys basically just were directly. Um, these guys just basically went to the nuclear option and nuked their relationship with these security researchers. Now, again, responsible disclosure doesn't mean necessarily that you aren't going to disclose it to the public. What responsible disclosure means is that you're going to allow the company to do the disclosure first and provide evidence of an instruction for clients or users so that they may act appropriately with their data. However, this can go bad. This can go wrong. One of the most famous situations that we've had most recently is the case of Chaotic Nightmare and Microsoft. If you're not familiar with this situation, Chaotic Nightmare was a security researcher who worked for Microsoft, but Microsoft has decided, since AI has become more and more prevalent, to reduce the size of their security researcher department, downsize, move in another direction, seeking other opportunities. Microsoft has basically done what Microsoft does, and they laid off just a bunch of security researchers. And Chaotic Nightmare was in the process and in active talks with his bosses and then some of the other developers at Microsoft in getting some things patched, but he was actively being ignored. And he felt like being let go was the last straw. And so what he has done, instead of responsibly disclosing any of the vulnerabilities that he was actively working on getting solved at Microsoft, he is now releasing them direct to the public with proof of concept exploits, which completely violates the responsible disclosure agreement. It allows attackers the ability to perform or exploit these vulnerabilities before Microsoft can patch them. And I understand why Chaotic Nightmare is doing this. I actually kind of agree with him. Microsoft is scummy, and if Microsoft is going to continue to be a scummy company and firing people and not actively looking to patch certain vulnerabilities that are reported to them, this is the only way that they're going to learn to allow for responsible disclosure. It sounds like there was a mistake and Microsoft may need to walk that back or whatever. However, Chaotic Nightmare has basically gone, this is the other side of that coin, where if you as a company aren't willing to follow through with your responsible disclosure or even patch or recognize that there's some work being done, people have the ability to basically retaliate. And that is something that may happen. So as a company, you may want to have a plan for responsible disclosure and validation and verification of a vulnerability within your own product. These are things that you should absolutely do. Again, this is probably not the greatest way to do it. I don't necessarily fully back what Chaotic Nightmare is doing just because it's putting people at risk. However, it is something that I can understand the reason for. Absolutely. But there are dozens and dozens of examples of where a security researcher has gone through and attempted to perform responsible disclosure with the company, sometimes even following their guidelines and or requests for responsible disclosure, following companies' requests. And they are getting sued or getting jailed or being threatened. There is there's a case with Boeing. A security researcher basically found a significant network security vulnerability within Boeing, and Boeing attempted to basically just cover it up and not report it, not disclose any of the vulnerabilities, not disclose any of the risk or potential exposure of data. And they basically tried to silence this security researcher. And they threatened this specific security researcher with legal action. They attempted to limit her ability to speak publicly about the situation and have tried tarnishing security researchers' reputation within the larger world, which is really bad. I get there is a specific want to, protect yourself and protect your company or protect your stockholders. which I don't fully understand, but hey, it's a company that stockholders make the corporations go round. But it is absolutely not okay for an organization to attempt to tarnish or otherwise damage an individual for knowing about something that they fucked up. Trying to cover it up that way will result in the exact opposite of what you're looking for. Just like with Andy Dufresne, because, the warden was such an asshole to him about trying to prove his innocence and wouldn't allow him the ability to prove himself innocent of a crime that he wasn't charged with. The Andy Dufresne, if the warden had done anything else, had been, polite or, politely declined Andy Dufresne's query or question, a bullet might not have traveled out the back of the warden's head, because Andy Dufresne might not have disclosed the fact that the warden was laundering money from community service projects into his own pockets. Because that's what responsible disclosure is. You find a problem, you wait a long enough time for the person to correct the action, and when they don't, you report it. Because that's what helps protect everybody. That is what helps keep everybody aligned, keep developers honest, and really protects everybody else so that everybody has an opportunity to identify, respond, and correct. And if, you're a company that decides that you're going to try to put somebody else in jail or, directly attack a security researcher because they're trying to do the right thing and trying to help you become better, well then, got no fucking compassion for you. Well, that's all I got time for today, guys. I hope you all have a great day.